This is Nightly Business Report with Bill Griffith and Sue Herrera.
Opioid settlement. Oxycontin maker Purdue Pharma is reportedly in talks to settle thousands of lawsuits against that company for billions of dollars.
Reunited. Philip Morris and Altria are in talks to merge, a deal that would bring back together two companies facing declining demand.
U-turn, why more drivers are turning off the very features designed to keep them safe. Those stories and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, August 27th.
And we do bid you a good evening, everybody, and welcome. We begin tonight with something a little different, something that has held the attention of the whole country for a while, and something that we have been reporting on for quite some time. That is the opioid epidemic. NBC News reported late this afternoon that Purdue Pharma is offering between $10 and $12 billion to settle more than 2,000 lawsuits connected to its role in the crisis. Purdue Pharma, you may know, is the maker of Oxycontin, the powerful painkiller that has been at the center of the opioid epidemic. The report of their offer to settle comes one day after a landmark ruling against Johnson & Johnson, which, as we reported last night, was ordered to pay $500 million to the state of Oklahoma for helping ignite one of the worst drug epidemics in American history. Ilan Mui has today's developments from Washington.
NBC News is reporting that Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family are negotiating to settle the flood of lawsuits against them for between $10 to $12 billion. About 2,000 cases have been consolidated in federal court in Ohio, accusing the company and the Sacklers for starting and sustaining the opioid crisis. NBC reports that Purdue has proposed filing for bankruptcy and then restructuring into a for-profit trust. That trust would then pay out between $7 to $8 billion, including about $4 billion of in-kind drugs to local governments, including medications that help rescue users from overdoses. The Sacklers would then pay an additional $3 to $4.5 billion. Now, this could be an important step in reaching a global settlement for other companies as well, similar to the $250 billion tobacco settlement in 1998. In a statement, Purdue said that it sees little good coming from years of wasteful litigation and appeals, and that a constructive global resolution is the best path forward. The Sackler family did not provide a comment to NBC. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Ilan Mui in Washington.
And later in our program this evening, Meg Terrell will take a closer look at the opioid litigation that is still pending and explain its importance.
On Wall Street, stocks dropped as bond yields moved lower and inverted, a technical phenomenon we've been telling you about that has preceded recessions in the past. That sent bank shares lower, and if you add in some concerns over trade, you have a down day for stocks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 120 points to 25,777. The Nasdaq was down 26, and the S&P 500 slid 9. So let's turn now to Mike Ryan to talk more about the stock and the bond market. He is the Chief Investment Officer at UBS Global Wealth Management Americas. Mike, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Sue.
You do not see a recession coming. You think the U.S. can avoid a recession, but you are paring back some of your equity positions.
We are, again, we don't see a recession, at least not over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, even though we are seeing some signs of weakening in the manufacturing side, and certainly the global economy is decelerated. Yet what you have balancing off is very strong labor market conditions in the U.S. and a pretty healthy consumer sector as well. So the risks of recession are still fairly low in our estimate. That doesn't mean, however, that we won't want to pare our risk back a bit because some of the uncertainties around trade. What we've just recently done is taken some of our risk exposure off with regard to equity markets and just gotten me a little bit more defensive in terms of our portfolio positioning.
Mike, I want to ask you about something that happened today. It's only the second time it's happened in the last 40-plus years, and that is the yield on the 30-year Treasury bond dipped below the yield of the S&P 500 index. Now, what we're looking here is a chart that takes us back to the late 70s, and you see that the spread between the two has been narrowing for years, and now the 30-year yields less than the stock market. What does that mean to you and the outlook for stocks?
Well, Bill, I think we have to be really careful here because I'm not sure that tells you a lot. It's more coincident than it is really a sense of cause and effect. Because remember, there were certainly periods in the past where we've had both recessions and bear markets where the 30-year bond was materially higher than what we had the S&P yield. So the notion that this somehow, because it's dropped below some technical level, that it's suggestive of recession or a bear market, we have to be careful not to overinterpret that.
Well, I would point out that the last time it happened, the only other time it happened was in March of '09, and that was a major bottom for the stock market.
Yeah, that's true. But remember, there were other bottoms in the stock market when you had the yield on the 30-year was materially higher. So the notion that simply the spread between the 30-year bond and the yield that exists on the dividends for the S&P 500, that it's somehow a forecast vehicle or it's somehow going to indicate either recession or bear market, we have to be careful not to overinterpret that. What I will say, though, is as yields fall, what it is a sign of is that there's concerns about global growth, and also there's concerns about the Fed's ability to generate a level of inflation that's more in line with their target of 2%.
That was going to be my question, but you answered it for me. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Mike Ryan with UBS Global Wealth Management Americas.
To the economy now, and a new report on consumer confidence, which showed optimism dipping slightly in August, but it does remain historically high. And when confidence is high, consumers are more likely to buy big-ticket items like houses. The latest read on home prices still shows the market is cooling off. But as Diana Olick reports, that may be about to change.
I would take this in a second.
Home buyers out shopping this spring finally started to get the upper hand, at least in terms of prices. The supply of homes for sale is still very low, but prices started to ease. Home prices nationally were up just 3.1% annually in June, according to the S&P Case-Shiller Index. That is half the gain they were seeing a year ago. In some markets like San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles, they were barely higher, and Seattle prices were actually 1% lower. But Case-Shiller is based on a 3-month average ending in June, so it does not take into account the huge drop in mortgage rates since May. The average rate on the 30-year fixed is now a full percentage point lower than it was a year ago. Lower rates give consumers more purchasing power, which helps boost sales and in turn can push prices higher again.
I do think now, with the pickup in home buying activity spurred by low mortgage rates, we're going to see that turn around, and we'll probably see some quickening in home price growth over the next 12 months.
More recent home price reads have in fact shown home prices heating up again. Sales of both new and existing homes are now showing improvement after a slower than expected spring. And while fall is not usually as busy as spring is for housing, there could be some pent-up demand ready to pounce thanks to those lower rates. The wild card, as always, is supply. There are far too few homes for sale on the lower end of the market, and that's where buyers depend most on even the smallest moves in mortgage rates. If rates should tick up again, all bets are off. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Diana Olick in Washington.
Odetta Cushy joins us now to talk more about the housing market. She is Deputy Chief Economist at First American Financial. Welcome, Odetta. It's nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
You, I think, believe or agree rather with what Diana just mentioned. Pretty healthy housing market, and maybe a longer period of time where consumers are going to be competing for homes.
Absolutely. Consumers are in a great position. They have lower mortgage rates. The labor market continues to be at 50-year bests. And we're seeing house price appreciation kind of moderate. And so affordability is really on the consumer side right now. And so we expect to see a little bit of an extended summer selling season, maybe into the fall. But that could lead to some higher house price appreciation. As we know, pent-up demand against limited supply means faster house price appreciation.
What about that limited supply? I think you and I talked about it the last time you were here. I mean, home builders have been shy about building much more with the uncertainty in the markets here. Do you expect a pickup at all at some point?
So we're seeing that builder confidence is actually quite high, and a lot of that is due to the lower mortgage rates. And we did see single-family housing starts were higher this month compared to last year. So we're anticipating that building will pick up in response to the lower mortgage rates, which will be a huge relief for the housing market.
Right.
We have lower mortgage rates, certainly, but there are those out there who are saying that what the bond market is doing, which is driving rates lower, is telling us that there may be some underlying concerns with the overall economy. What do you think about that? And could all the volatility we've been seeing recently affect home buyers?
Certainly consumer sentiment is a big part of making one of the biggest financial decisions you'll ever make in your life. But I think it's important to note that the economic fundamentals are there. Consumers do have more equity than they've ever had in history. And again, affordability is high. So ultimately, that may work to kind of trump some of the dampening in consumer confidence that's stemming from a lot of the trade uncertainties.
Odetta, thank you so much. Odetta Kushi with First American Financial.
Time to take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. We begin with shares of Verizon. They were upgraded to outperform from perform at Oppenheimer. The analyst says that Verizon should be early and successful with its 5G network. Price target $70. That stock rose a fraction today to $57.18. But Oppenheimer downgraded Verizon's smaller rival T-Mobile to perform from outperform. The analyst expects T-Mobile to have a difficult time as it merges with Sprint. In fact, the firm pulled its price target on that stock. Shares fell 1% today to $77.12.
Zynga was added to Wedbush's Best Ideas list with an outperform rating. The list represents stocks with the potential for 20% gains in 6 months. The analyst says Zynga's new releases could push results past estimates. The price target is $9. The stock rose 2% to $5.72. Red Robin Gourmet was downgraded to underperform from neutral at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. The analyst believes earnings growth will materially miss consensus expectations next year. The price target is $30. The stock fell more than 7.5% to $31.70.
Still ahead, a decade after being apart, Altria and Philip Morris may be looking to get back together. A former Google employee has been charged with stealing trade secrets from Google and then taking them to Uber. According to the complaint, the former employee downloaded more than 14,000 files related to Google's autonomous car project before resigning from the company. He then created a startup that was acquired by Uber. Both Uber and Google cooperated with the government officials in that investigation.
Altria and Philip Morris are in talks to merge. Such a deal would reunite them after more than a decade apart, and it comes as both see sales fall. Investors weren't too enthusiastic about the idea. Both stocks fell in trading today. Frank Holland has more.
As cigarette sales continue to fall globally, tobacco companies are looking for new products such as e-cigarettes and heated tobacco to reignite the industry. Now, a potential merger between Philip Morris and Altria could reunite these companies after a split in 2008, bringing Marlboro, Juul, and the newly approved IQOS heated tobacco product under one roof. Philip Morris sells Marlboro outside of the U.S. and has a strong international distribution network. IQOS was approved for U.S. sale by the FDA in April. Altria will handle the marketing and distribution. In December, Altria also bought a 35% stake in Juul, the market leader for e-cigarettes in the U.S. Wells Fargo analyst Bonnie Herzog forecasted a possible deal ahead of the announcement on Tuesday, citing benefits of scale, improved and accelerated rollout of Juul and IQOS globally, better cash flow for the combined company. Jefferies analyst Ryan Tompkins said there are sizable revenue opportunities, and a merger would create better international distribution for Juul and better U.S. rollout for IQOS. The merger would create the biggest tobacco company in the world with the two fastest selling products in the industry and the most extensive distribution network, according to analysts.
Sources say the two companies are still actively discussing this possible deal, and those discussions are expected to continue for several more weeks. One question mark here is cannabis. Altria purchased a 45% stake in cannabis producer Cronos last year. It's not clear how that investment would be handled by a combined company. For Nightly Business Report, Frank Holland.
Lower prices hurt J.M. Smucker's results, and that's where we begin tonight's market focus, with the food company missing earnings expectations as prices for two of its key products, coffee and peanut butter, fell. It's also facing increased competition in its competitive food business for pets. Company cut its full-year forecast as a result. That sent shares lower by more than 8% to 103.69. AstraZeneca was granted fast-track approval status by the FDA for one of its drugs. The company's attempting to get its popular diabetes treatment approved for use in preventing heart and kidney failure for patients who have chronic kidney disease. The stock was up a fraction today to 44.88. And a report out today says that Revlon is going to begin reaching out to potential bidders next month as it looks for a buyer that it hopes can turn around the struggling cosmetics company. The company's been exploring either a sale of the entire company or of its major brands. Shares rose nearly 1.5% today to 16.38.
The pizza chain Papa John's has named Arby's president Rob Lynch as its new president and CEO. Lynch will replace Papa John's interim CEO, who took over last year after the company's founder resigned. The company is in the midst of a turnaround, trying to change its image and shore up sales. Shares jumped more than 9% to 48 even. Taiwan Semiconductor is being sued for patent infringement by rival chipmaker Global Foundries. Global Foundries is looking to stop Taiwan's semis customers, which include Apple, from importing affected products to the U.S. and Germany. Taiwan Semiconductor stock was up a fraction to 41.35. BP agreed to sell its Alaskan operations to privately held Hilcorp for more than $5 billion. The decision is part of its plan to raise $10 billion over the next 2 years to strengthen its balance sheet. BP has operated in that region for about 50 years. The shares were up a fraction to 36.60.
As we reported at the top of the program, Purdue Pharma is reportedly offering as much as $12 billion to settle opioid claims. Now, this follows last night's ruling against Johnson & Johnson for its role in this epidemic. And as Meg Terrell reports now from Norman, Oklahoma, there is still a lot more litigation ahead.
Austin Box was 22, a linebacker for the University of Oklahoma. His dad, Craig, said that was Austin's dream.
He was a tremendous student and athlete, graduated high school early, was recruited heavily to play baseball and football at various colleges.
After an injury, Austin took opioid painkillers prescribed for a ruptured disc. But it was a shock to his parents when, in 2011, he died, and opioids were found in his system.
There were 4 or 5 different kinds in his system at the time of death.
Craig Box testified in a landmark trial in Oklahoma that reached its conclusion this week. A judge here ruled Johnson & Johnson was responsible for the state's opioid crisis.
Those actions compromised the health and safety of thousands of Oklahomans,
and ordered the company to pay $572 million to help abate it. Purdue Pharma and Teva had settled before the trial began. The Oklahoma case was just the first to go to trial of thousands pending across the country, seeking to hold the drug industry accountable for the opioid epidemic. Attention now turns to a massive set of federal cases, consolidated in Ohio in what's known as a multi-district litigation, or MDL, brought by thousands of cities, counties, and others. An attorney for J&J said the Oklahoma results should have no bearing on those cases.
The cases that are consolidated in the MDL proceeding in Cleveland, Ohio, are under different law. They have different parties, different theories, and so we do believe that those are very different.
Yet stocks of companies involved in that litigation jumped last night on J&J's ruling, which was smaller than Wall Street anticipated. Oklahoma's Attorney General said that's the wrong take.
The multiplier effect around the country is considerable. There are 2,000 plaintiffs in the MDL and 50 other states. For those analysts to be characterizing this as a win, they need to go back to business school.
That Ohio case will bring scrutiny to more players in the opioid crisis, not just drug makers, but distributors and pharmacies as well. A massive DEA database central to those cases details the sheer number of opioid pills that were dispensed and where.
Here in Cleveland County, Oklahoma, for example, more than 70 million prescription pain pills were supplied between 2006 and 2012, enough for 41 pills per person per year. This Walgreens in Norman received the highest number of pills, almost 4 million.
The judge in the federal case in Ohio is pushing for a settlement, which analysts expect could top $100 billion. Craig Box says that would be the best outcome to make a dent in the epidemic.
I hope that this is a message to the opioid companies, candidly, that maybe force some settlements in some of those cases so the states can receive funds to address the problem quicker than having to go through a trial like this.
J&J, though it went to trial in Oklahoma, said it's open to a potential settlement in the federal cases. The first trial is set to begin October 21st. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Meg Terrell in Norman, Oklahoma.
Still ahead, Amtrak's big makeover.
I'm Seema Modi in Newcastle, Delaware, where Amtrak is working to modernize and speed up its trains. The question is whether these upgrades will pay off. That story next on Nightly Business Report.
A Russian company has now become the first Boeing customer to sue the plane maker over the grounding of its 737 MAX. The company agreed to purchase 35 planes several years ago and alleges that Boeing breached that contract by misrepresenting how safe the plane was to fly. It also claims that Boeing put profits ahead of safety. The jet, of course, as you know, has been grounded since mid-March, and regulators say that there is no timetable for its return.
From planes to trains, Amtrak wants your next trip to be by rail, so it's making a lot of changes to attract new travelers. But there's one big challenge. Seema Modi is in Newcastle, Delaware tonight.
Seeking to attract more business travelers, Amtrak is spending over $2 billion to modernize its Acela fleet, with 28 new high-speed trains that are designed to operate at a faster speed of 160 miles per hour, up from 150 on the current Acela. The next-generation trains are being built by French manufacturer Alstom, but are being manufactured in facilities in upstate New York, in total creating more than 1,300 jobs. They promise to accommodate 30% more passengers and be 20% more efficient, thanks to new lightweight technology.
In this new Alstom factory in Newcastle, Delaware, we're getting a look at the new Acela train, which comes into service in 2021. Amtrak rolling out features like updated Wi-Fi, USB ports, personal outlets, and an adjustable reading light in every seat.
Amtrak says the goal is to make trains more competitive with planes, cars, and other forms of public transit, while also addressing safety concerns following several fatal accidents over the past 5 years.
75% of travelers between air and rail are choosing Amtrak. And on the north end, which is between New York and Boston, we are at just over 50%. We see a lot of opportunity for growth on the north end. There's an awful lot of business that is growing in the Boston area.
Amtrak is betting the new upgrades will pay off. The Northeastern Corridor runs from Boston to Washington and currently carries roughly 12 million passengers a year. It accounts for nearly 40% of the U.S. railroad's traffic, and Amtrak is hoping that a new nonstop service between New York and D.C. will increase bookings. But experts say the future of American high-speed rail will be challenged by the aging infrastructure. Amtrak executives have been urging the White House and lawmakers to allocate more federal funds towards railroads, bridges, and tunnels. But President Trump has pushed back, saying the individual states should make these updates.
There's absolutely a risk. I often say, once the new trains enter service, we will have the highest generation, the fifth generation of high-speed rail technology operating on 19th century infrastructure in some places. For instance, we have tunnels, a tunnel in Baltimore that dates back to the late 1800s. And it's safe, it's operable, but we have to operate at very slow speeds.
And with no timeline on a U.S. infrastructure bill, experts say lawmakers need to find a solution to ensure customers remain safe and these new trains can operate smoothly. For Nightly Business Report, Seema Modi, Newcastle, Delaware.
And finally, from trains to cars, as automobile makers add more features to keep drivers safe, a growing number of those drivers are turning them off. Why? Because drivers are fed up with the warnings. Phil LeBeau has that story.
If you have a new car or truck and have drifted out of your lane or failed to signal, you've seen the warning. Stay in your lane. J.D. Power says lane departure warnings are built into almost 2/3 of the current models. And in a survey of 20,000 owners, almost a fourth of them said they don't like those warnings, and 30% have turned it off.
What we're seeing is a higher degree of consumers expressing their level of annoyance and these systems being bothersome.
This is not what automakers had in mind when they started building vehicles with technology to help drivers avoid collisions. From automatic emergency braking to adaptive cruise control, cars now make decisions to keep us safe before we do something wrong behind the wheel. All of these features sound great in the showroom, but out on the road, if a warning goes off or the steering wheel vibrates, a lot of people don't like it.
We get the feedback from consumers saying that sometimes it feels like I'm fighting against the vehicle. Those are the elements where it really is not feeling like a partnered type of driving situation.
It's not just lane departure systems drivers are turning off. They're also disabling adaptive cruise control and rear auto emergency braking, which raises the question, if drivers don't like the decisions their cars are making right now, will they get irritated in autonomous vehicles that may not drive or handle situations the way we would behind the wheel? This type of technology is not going away. In fact, it's becoming more pronounced, which means more drivers will be turning off the safety features designed to keep them safe. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Chicago.
And before we go, here's a look at the day's final numbers from Wall Street. The Dow fell 120 points to 25,777. The Nasdaq was down 26, and the S&P 500 slid by 9. And that is Nightly Business Report tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Bill Griffith. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow.